Evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for part 3 of our Nautical Nights 2023 Winter Speaker Series. We have people joining us in person, welcome, and we also have people joining us online via YouTube live stream, welcome as well. A little bit of housekeeping, primarily, actually for both people. Those of you who are joining us in person, we just ask that you turn your cell phones don't necessarily have to be off, but maybe turn down so they're silent. And then, of course, anyone joining us on Zoom, feel free to keep your phones turned up. But if you would like to engage in our presentation this evening, feel free to comment or send your questions via the YouTube chat. If that's not working for you, you do have the option of sending them by email to marmus@marmuseum.ca. I will put that email address in the chat so you have it for your reference. Made a mistake of folding these. The Marine Museum would first like to acknowledge that the waterways and land located within the Great Lakes catchment area have a long history predating the establishment of European settlements. The waterways in particular are to be acknowledged as the traditional trade routes of the Indigenous peoples, together providing a network of trade and travel routes essential to communities since time immemorial. The Marine Museum of the Great Lakes acknowledges the site it sits on and the water it interacts with to be the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat people of the Six Nations Iroquois Confederacy and Huron-Wendat peoples. We thank these nations for their care and stewardship of this land and water, and we are committed to sharing this stewardship moving forward. As I said, this evening we were joined for part 3 of our Nautical Nights speaker series, and we're very honored to welcome Kristen Lowitt. I got it right, perfect. Kristen is an assistant professor in the School of Environmental Studies at Queen's University. Her research program is directed towards working with communities to build just and sustainable food systems. Interests include small-scale fisheries, Indigenous settler collaborations for food sovereignty, and collective action for food policy and governance. This talk will discuss the methodologies underlying the collaborative film research project supporting, apologies if I get the pronunciation wrong, Batchewana?
Batchewana.
Perfect. First Nations and traditional fisheries, and share some of the social, political, and ecological relationships surrounding their fisheries as expressed in the documentary film. So I invite you to join me in person and virtually to welcome Kristen to the podium.
Thank you, and thank you, Michelle, for the generous introduction and for hosting me tonight. And excited to be here. And I also, wanted to begin by recognizing, as Michelle also said, that we are situated on traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. This territory is also part of the Dish with One Spoon wampum, a treaty among Indigenous nations to protect and share the resources around the Great Lakes. And so it's really in that spirit that I'm going to be sharing with you this evening a participatory action research project undertaken in collaboration with Batchewana First Nation to document the fishing knowledge and stories that are central to strengthening their traditional fisheries and their governance. And so, as Michelle said, I'm Kristen Lowitt. I'm an assistant professor in environmental studies at Queen's University. I'm one of the academics that co-led this project. Others involved in this work include, of course, the community, Batchewana First Nation, Chief Dean Sayers, in particular, a documentary filmmaker, Sarah Furlot, and my academic co-lead on this work, Dr. Charles Levko, who is Canada Research Chair in Sustainable and Equitable Food Systems at Lakehead University. So what I will do this evening is really just share with you a bit about sort of how this project came to be, some of the historical context for the work, touching on Indigenous settler fishing relationships in Canada. I will then briefly say a little bit more about some of the themes that are touched upon in the film. And then at the end, likely play sort of a short clip. And I sort of will mention that there is we're starting to organize screenings of this film. There is a public screening organized for February 23rd in Kingston, and I'll mention that at the end if you're interested in seeing the full documentary. So Batchewana First Nation, just to sort of orient ourselves, is located on the northeast shores of Lake Superior, with traditional territories you can see on the map spanning from Whitefish Island on the St. Mary's River up to Pukassaw. Their traditional land base was in part recognized through the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850, to which they're signatories. Parcels of land were subsequently removed through the Penfather Treaty of 1859, and through ongoing purchases and court cases, Batchewana First Nation continues to reclaim additional parts of their traditional territory. So this map shows their main reserve communities, as well as additional further sort of 8, I believe, uninhabited communities. So for millennia, they made use of the abundant fish, wildlife of Lake Superior. Fish as a food source deeply integrated into cultures, economies, and spiritual practices. Of course, European colonization severely impacted these practices and ways of life. But Batchewana First Nation community members continue to fish, assert their inherent Aboriginal treaty rights. Thank you. So today there's a population of approximately 3,000 people, officially made up of 4 reserve communities that include Gooley Bay, Obadjawan, Rankin, and Whitefish Island. So I wanted to begin by sharing this quotation from Chief Dean Sayers, and I'll read it here. He says, "We have the stories that take us way back to creation, and in those stories we talk about inherent responsibility and inherent obligation. And it is our people that have entered into many relationships with many nations all around North America. We refer to North America as Turtle Island, and we are at the center. The Great Lakes are the heart of Turtle Island, and the condition of Turtle Island is dependent on the condition of the Great Lakes, the heart, and from the heart all the veins nourish all of creation. We as Anishinaabe people, or Ojibwe people, have a tremendous responsibility to protect that water." And so in this quote, Chief Sayers refers to the inherent responsibilities and obligations that Batchewana has to protect the water and fisheries of Lake Superior. In line with these inherent rights and responsibilities, they haven't entered into a fishing agreement with the province of Ontario. Chief Dean Sayers is very kind of clear, and you see this in the documentary film we did and in interviews, that Batchewana First Nation retains sovereignty over their lands and waters, along with governance over the fisheries. He says we are the first level of law on these lands, not the Ontario government or the Canadian government. However, the province of Ontario has not recognized Batchewana's jurisdiction, so there are ongoing tensions, and the film depicts some of these conflicts with the settler state around management and regulation. So I want to provide, before I get into sort of the approach to this film, a bit more sort of context around Indigenous settler fishing relations in Canada. And I should note, in terms of myself, I identify as a settler, a Canadian, and someone sort of approaching this research from that sort of perspective and in spirit. So as I mentioned, Indigenous fishing activities were disrupted with the arrival of European settlers originally in the early 17th century to exploit the fur trade. Throughout the late 17th and late 19th centuries, commercial fishing helped to support the fur trade. Indigenous peoples were central in the harvesting and packing and curing of fish. When the fur trade collapsed in the late 19th century, some traditional practices were abandoned, and Indigenous peoples were inundated with new agents of change, including the push to organize into treaty groups. So, for example, after the signing of the Robinson treaties, which includes the Robinson-Huron Treaty that Batchewana First Nation is signatory to, policy shifted. So while treaties proclaimed the privilege of hunting and fishing, the settler government interpreted this as fishing that was only allowed if it was for consumption, thus further marginalizing Indigenous people from the local fishing economy. In the late 19th century, fisheries also further changed through the introduction of modern fisheries management, and this is one of the sort of central themes in the film as well. So the Canada Fisheries Act was established in 1868, and with this act, the Crown asserted authority for management, control, conservation of fisheries. Indigenous peoples had established fisheries, trade network systems of governance and diplomacy that were displaced by this act. So for inland fisheries today, including those around the Great Lakes, then provinces have been delegated authority for fisheries management under the Canada Fisheries Act. And this comes up in the film, especially with reference to the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. I think they've since changed their acronym, which manage fisheries, settler government on Lake Superior. And some of the tensions among Bachelor First Nation and the settler kind of state over fisheries jurisdiction and governance. So Batchewana First Nation fisheries today are the largest on the Canadian side of Lake Superior, among the most established Indigenous fisheries in the Great Lakes region. They are made up of approximately 20 fishing enterprises, including captains and their crews. In total, there are about 75 community members that are engaged in the fishery, considering those that work in related aspects, including processing or marketing and delivery of fish. Boats and crew sizes vary from small open boats with one crew member to 60-foot tugs with as many as 5 crew members. Lake trout, lake whitefish are the main species that are harvested. And alongside the boat fishery, there is a small winter ice fishery. And so in addition to contributing directly to sustenance in the community, relationships, cultural identity are central, and their fish is sold also within the surrounding region as well to a network of farmers markets, off-the-boat sales, and to retail stores and restaurants. So this slide depicts sort of our approach to the film and to this project. And so, as I mentioned, I identify as non-Indigenous, as a settler Canadian. I grew up around the Great Lakes and lived for a number of years in different parts of Canada for a while, in Atlantic Canada for a short time in the prairies, and now I've returned to the Great Lakes. And I think through this work, I've developed a different understanding, I think, from relationship to this region than I hadn't had before. And so an important kind of part of my, positionality in this work is thinking about sort of my role as a settler Canadian and kind of working in partnership with communities to do this. So there is a long history of colonial research, we might call colonial research, which really reflects and reinforces sort of domination and exploitation through attitudes, through power differences that are embodied in research relationships. And so there's a long history of this in Canada and other contexts, research that has been done sort of really in sort of blatant disregard for rights and knowledge of participants, intrusive methodologies. And so this long history of extractive research. Australian Wadi Wadi poet Barbara Nicholson also sort of refers to this. She challenges us to think about the power relations that are involved in doing research. And she said, you go to university and get a bit of paper that says you're qualified. Does it also say that you have unlimited rights to invadement space? It seems that you believe your bit of paper is both passport and visa to my place, that henceforth you have the right to scrutinize the bits and pieces of me. And so as an academic in environmental studies, I have this very interdisciplinary sort of social science background, grappling sort of with this broader sort of colonial history of research. And so what we tried to do in this project could be referred to as more sort of post-colonial research, sometimes decolonizing, and that's attempting to use research to break down ways in which settler colonialism can be maintained. So research becomes sort of more of an avenue for people to exercise responsibility over their own lives. Participatory action research refers to this, and so really developing research questions and methods with communities. So, in the context of this, particular project and this film, it sort of emerged out of a process of multiple years of relationship building especially with the chief of the community, Dean Sayers, in response to the community's interest to collect and share their experiences around fishing and to share this in the form of a video. So this was really sort of something that they expressed a desire around. I think I first met Chief Dean Sayers in 2017 doing interviews around Lake Superior. We met other times after that, attended a conference together. We wrote a book chapter, and it sort of eventually led to a larger project. And so we were able to secure a grant from the Social Science Humanities Research Council to support working with the documentary filmmaker, Sarah Furlot from Thunder Bay, who put this film together. So the filming took place prior to the pandemic, so pre-COVID, which of course wasn't anybody's mind at the time. So we were lucky that we did that when we did. So it was June 2019 that we spent some time in the community, did 11 in-depth interviews with fish harvesters, youth, elders, community leaders. The interview sort of guides were the kind of questions we were interested in were developed jointly with Chief Sayers, who also helped to sort of identify some of the community members to speak with, set up our schedule of interviews when we were there. And we used sort of narrative interviewing as an approach, as one which really is meant to prioritize the perspective of the storyteller, rather than imposing a kind of a specific agenda and list of questions. Particularly since this fits well with oral storytelling traditions. Sarah, as a documentary filmmaker, is also more familiar with this type of narrative approach, and so that's of course translated into the documentary film that I'll play a short clip from. So I wanted to also note here that ceremony was also an important part of this project, and I think building some of the relationships that are important to undertaking and moving forward this work. Chief Dean Sayers said, what really makes this work that we're doing really special is that we incorporate spirit and ceremony, and that has tremendous value. I think that's going to provide the longevity of the applicability of what we've learned and discussed over the course of the entire project. And so as someone, who's academic, research is oriented around food and food systems, there's also ties here to food sovereignty. And I think this notion that's increasingly articulated among Indigenous scholars and community members of food as also sacred, as a principle of food sovereignty. And so the community invited us, let us film a pipe ceremony, which is quite rare. And the film itself further depicts the culture and ceremonial practices that are deeply embedded within fishing. So I'll say a little bit about what we heard, who's in the film, sort of what you might expect if you were in the fuller version. So this is not everyone that's in the film, but I will kind of give some sort of snapshots, and then we'll share sort of a clip of the film for you to watch. So one of the community members in the film is Jim Sayers. He is a fishing captain. He runs a family business called Crane Fisheries. He fishes out of Mance Harbor and owns the vessel, the Gordana J, which is named after his parents, Gordon and Donna, who were instrumental in pursuing Batchewana First Nations treaty right to fish. He's fished since he was 14 years old, and the company Crane Fisheries is also named after the Crane clan, to which he belongs. And that's also Sarah on the left side of the slide there, setting up her filming gear and Jane's boat. James Agua is also in the film, and another community member that we interviewed for this project. Seen here with his crew at Agua Fisheries. They have the largest Indigenous owned and operated fishing business on the Canadian side of the Great Lakes. So this is a family business. His sons are involved in it as well, which is important to him in terms of maintaining fishing traditions. They recently secured a grant to establish a new fish processing facility, which you can see in the photo here, and have a strong network of customers and restaurants, farmers markets, and also run a fish and chip stand. Dylan Agua is the youngest fish harvester in Batchewana. He explains learning how to fish from his uncle Percy, who is seated there in the background in the kitchen. And he really emphasized that he felt the community appreciates him as a fish harvester who takes risks every day to go out on the lake, put food on people's tables. And he's passionate about getting more youth involved in the fishery, which he considers to be part of his inheritance. So he also took us on a tour of his boat called the Little Snick, and that's also in the film. So the final individual introduced, and again, this isn't everyone we interviewed, but sort of a few snapshots. Greg Agua, who was at the center of a court case in the 1990s reaffirming Batchewana First Nations fishing rights. And so he was charged at the time for fishing without a license, and was at the center of that case reaffirming Batchewana's commercial rights to fish. He's also, as he described to us, a residential school survivor, and credits some of that experience. He's referred to the government not being able to break me as giving him the power to continue to kind of go up and fight the government for their fishing rights. So I'm sharing on this last slide a poster for an upcoming film screening and discussion. This is a public screening that will take place February 23rd at 6 p.m. in the screening room. So we're excited now to be sort of in this phase of knowledge mobilization and sharing this project. And so this is, will feature a screening of the film, and then also two sort of guest speakers afterwards who are going to discuss the film and sort of share their insights and experiences about how the film relates to issues in their communities. And so the guest speakers include Abraham Francis from Yakusasani community and Carrie-Ann Charles from Georgina Island First Nation. So if you're interested and want to see the full film and engage in that discussion, that event is upcoming. I've also put the link to our website at the bottom. So it's batchewanungfish.ca. So Batchewanung was we included in the title to the film as the traditional Ojibwe word for Batchewana Bay. So batchewanungfish.ca is the website for the project. There's details there about the individuals in the film, how it was made, further resources about the community, publications that we've worked on, co-authored with the community. So you can also kind of go there to get more context and learn about the film. So in conclusion, and I will play kind of a portion of the film for you in a moment. I want to end by saying, I think as a kind of a settler academic, and someone who identifies also, as kind of a scholar and activist in some of the work that I do with communities around food systems, I hope that this effort contributes to rebuilding renewed collective relationships among Indigenous and settler governments, Indigenous and settler communities that are important for Batchewana First Nation to sustain their fisheries into the future, and to support the communities in their broader efforts of political and cultural resurgence, including the continuity of fishing, which is a key component. So I'm going to close this and...
Kristen,
yes.
Did you actually send me the email?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't get it.
Oh, okay, I can check again, but I think I'm sure I did.
I ideally like to try to get it through here, but otherwise we're just returning.
I can check. Let me open my email and see if it's sent.
Just double check the email address if you got it wrong.
Unless it didn't. Michelle.c, is that right?
Yeah, B and not E.
Oh, okay, that would be why.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll forward it to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Stay on her hand.
I'm here, so that's good. All right. So I think you should get that now.
Thank you.
I'll wait to make sure you have it before I.
Got the email, so the link.
Many, many years ago, thousands of years ago, tens of thousands of years ago, time didn't matter. Time was not a factor to our people. We were close to Gije Manado, the creator. Anishinaabe learnt and was given and was gifted the gift of love, the gift of kindness, humility, truth. And when they were close to the creator, close to Gije Manado, and it come time for him to tell Anishinaabe, you have to go, you have a road, you have a responsibility out there. Anishinaabe, and he had a hard time to leave because he didn't want to leave all those beautiful feelings that he had of love and kindness and caring and truth. 4 times he had stopped, and each time the Creator said, you have to go. I'll put something here for you, but you have to go further. But that 8th time where he stopped to turn around and look, he couldn't see the Creator. He had come so far. And what he put there at the end of that road was a very beautiful woman. And that very beautiful woman was Shkikimikwe, or Namama Aki, your mother, the earth. And he put that Anishinaabe down onto what we call Turtle Island. You have a family here. This is a part of your being. This is a part of you. This is your mother. She is as much of a part of you as the trees are to you, as the animals are to you, the birds, the fish, the medicines. All that surrounds you is your relations. That's all your family. And part of that responsibility is to take care of your family. Take care and show your family that respect and that kindness and that love and all that you learned when you were at the Creator.
Anin, Ojo, Ogima Nebadagojin Guyakisid, Dishnakas, Pedronang Donji, Jock Dodem, Nishnabene and good morning, I'm Dean Sayers. I'm the chief of Batchewana First Nation. I'm Ojibwe from the Crane clan. We were placed here by the Creator, and we really took serious our inheritance, and we've been looking after the fishery ever since. I'm really looking forward to sharing some of the insights today. Maybe we'll even get out on the lake. That would be really great to have you guys join us as we venture out into our villages here in the eastern side of Lake Superior. We had territory that we looked after that was part of our inheritance, and the dominant clan in this area, our governance or social structures, is the Crane clan. So the Crane clan, the Creator instructed us to fly around and find the area that we were going to take care of and look after. We chose Baoting or Sault Ste. Marie and all the land on eastern Lake Superior up to an area called Puckasa, inland to the height of land where the water flows into Lake Superior.
Ani Bojo, Harvey Dejnakas, Batchewana Dunjiman. So I know our people have always fished commercially, Baoting as they known it before in the past and today. But our people have been coming here forever because of that whitefish at the rapids. It became a regular meeting area. People would come from all over, Anishinaabe people.
Bonjour. Min wabanung ano nene edition because Wabski Mangan and Dodum. Batchewana First Nation Dunjiba. Ojibwe nene and Dow. Miigwechkin away in Simon, in Simon. I just wanted to introduce myself that way. That's the way I was taught how to introduce myself. My English name is Vernon Surrett. This Baoting, this area was just like a magnet area for people to come in and trade. They would trade with the Ottawa people, the Odawa people, the Potawatomi people, the people of the Three Fires. They would trade with Iroquois people. They would trade with the people at Walpole Island, Lake Superior, and trade their fish for goods.
A lot of our people still live that life. They gather medicines. They make medicine. A lot of our people are still traditional, and it's been that way since time memorial.
The people at Batchewana also had a management system in place, is what they observed. When they went down to trade with the people down in Mackinac Straits and Mackinac Island, families would trade and come to this area, and some of our people would go and live in that area for maybe a season of the fishery, just to monitor the fishery to see and try and ensure and let people know not to take too much of the resource.
Well, I grew up in Batchewana. It was a fishing village. Everybody fished there. Everybody fished. Everybody, all the elders, my grandfathers, and everybody else. As I remember growing up, I used to go with my dad. We didn't have the boats they have today. We had to row there at the lake, set nets, then go out and pull them.
The newcomers that were coming into the country, depended on that as well. They came to Batchewana people and for the fishery, and 850 barrels of fish, 400 barrels in one day of fish were supplied to the people that were to the newcomers, who were then selling it down in Detroit and different areas. So they came and they depended on Batchewana people to supply, to meet their demand.
That's what we do in the village. Everybody fished, you know, to maintain our what we had to eat and everything. Sometimes we trade the fish to get what we need. Sometimes we sell it. And that's how they did in the village.
And as the settler governments came in and seeing that resource benefit the people of Batchewana by way of trade and by way of commerce, they began to try and monopolize it.
There are movements on the part of Canada right now that will reduce our nation-to-nation relationship. Whereas they want to place our relationship as Indigenous people under Canadian legislation and fall under part of Canada's Constitution. And I think the intent is good, but when you look at how Canada does business, like Anishinaabe law doesn't change.
When that smoke and fire goes right up to the sky, to the crater.
Our law don't change. It's always the same. Natural law doesn't change, and it's all intertwined. Every fall, the whitefish will spawn. We can't make a law and change that. Canadian law changes depending on who's in government, whether it's a conservative government or a liberal government. What's law today may not be law tomorrow, and if we put ourselves under that constitution, we're jeopardizing our inherited obligations and inherent rights.
The Indians went fishing. They always talk to Mr. Joe. He's the caretaker of Lake Superior. Mr. Joe always helped the Indians, especially when they were out there fishing. Because the Indians always fish, always. Miigwech, 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 miigwech.
in June 2019, so before the pandemic. And part of the reason it took, I guess, a little while to kind of reach this stage, of finishing the film and having something to share is partly because of the pandemic. And so there was a period of time when we couldn't return to the community. I should mention that, Batchewana First Nation keeps ownership of the film. I mean, it's theirs, but we wanted to make sure that the community and the people involved in it could see it first. So I think it was, I don't remember, it was summer of 2021. At one point we were able to go back, during the pandemic, and do a sort of a small viewing with the people in the film and sort of get their input and ideas. And now we're able to sort of begin to, share this more widely.
And what was the approximate population of the peoples in that general area? Like, are we talking hundreds or below, or?
Yeah, I don't know. Oh, sorry, the question was about population. And so historically, I don't know to give you accurate numbers. I'd hesitate to do that. I know presently the population of Batchewana First Nation is 3,000 people, and I believe that is only like the on reserve sort of population among the 4 reserve communities.
The knowledge keeper was speaking about trading barrels of fish. And it seemed like that was early on in their fisheries and in trading. How were the fish preserved?
Yeah, so the question was about trading fish and how were the fish preserved. And I would have to go and check and read the interviews, because I think it's probably in there. And we did the interviews with each fisher or knowledge keeper generally lasted, a couple hours, or sometimes took place over the course of multiple days. So I don't know if I have an answer for you off the top of my head. I'm sure if they were, could tell you. But I could also, try and find that out.
In my experience as a Newfoundlander, typically you would dry it and you pack it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's like, oh, you'd smoke it and pack it.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah.
Typically you would, I mean,
Salt.
at least there, but you wouldn't have had salt shipped in back 1,000 years or 800 years from the ocean to there. So
That's what I was trying to find.
Yeah.
dried and
Like
smoked.
how it was cured or dried or smoked, yeah.
Why don't you repeat that comment?
The comment was about different ways of preserving fish and questions about access to salt, sort of, many more sort of thousands of years ago, and methods for preserving fish. Yeah. I can tell you, I know today, and so in the film, James Agua, who runs Agua Fishers, is featured in the film, and so there's multiple ways now, that they're sort of preparing their fish. It has a smoker, and it's dried, and it's sold in sort of different forms, and part of that was important too. Some of the value-added sort of fish products in their business as well that they sell within Batchewana and the surrounding area.
Do they sell fish locally here? Lake Superior.
Do they sell? So would they sell fish here, for example? Not that I know of. I mean, I think as far as I know, most of Batchewana First Nation fish. So in the harvesters we interviewed are selling mostly sort of in that portion of Lake Superior in and around Sault Ste. Marie. James Agua mentioned, desire to also maybe try and export some fish as well, like sort of across the border into the U.S.
The fishing license that they're requiring are commercial and actually local for commercial local fishing that they can't get. It's not that they're getting commercial license to ship to Kingston or to, do you know what I mean? Like it's very small, what they're fighting for. Like that should be already granted. Like if you're selling like local fish, it should be already part of the system, right?
Yeah, so the question was about selling local fish and sort of licensings and regulations around that, right? And I think probably the main message from the film is I think sort of Chief Sayers captured this. He says in the film in one of the interviews in terms of exercising their sort of laws as its primary for their fishery, right? and being able to, to fish for subsistence or for trade or commercially, and to exert their own kind of laws and governance structures to do that. And so they have their own sort of fisheries authority they set up to do that. And so to kind of exercise sort of their long-standing rights and inherent rights to do that, rather than that being something that, is controlled by, for just a small license or some sort of right granted to them by, colonial government, I guess,
Yeah.
to your point.
Yeah, so they want to be able to control that whole territory, is what you're saying, and then pursue it, but right now they cannot do that. Okay.
I think that that's part of sort of their assertions of sort of jurisdiction and self-determination over their territory and ongoing efforts to exercise those rights.
You said that they have around 3,000 people living there as part of their total community. Well, it doesn't take a very big fishery to supply all the fish required, or do most of the fish get eaten by the local 3,000 people?
Excuse me, yes, the question was where the fish are eaten. And I think it's a combination of both from the people we spoke to in the film. So fish is retained in the community for consumption, subsistence, eaten by fishing families and other non-fishing families. And then fish that's also sold to the surrounding area. So I think it's both activities, yeah.
Yes, they have their own rules for how to preserve the fish for the community. It's only when they try to send it out of the community they run into difficulty. That's if they send any out at all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember what my question was. My question was, this is fishing that's happening primarily out in the lake. This is not, what do you call it? I don't want to say artificial fishing, but fishing, what do you call them, the schools and the farms, fish farms. Has that, I take it that's the case. It's not, it's wild fishing, it's not, or is it both?
No, yes.
It's wild fishing?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Has fish farms been considered because I know that fish populations in the lakes, that's one of the reasons why commercial fishing decreased so much over the 20th century, because of overfishing. And I expect that's had an impact on that community as well. Has fish farming become a potential option, or has that been considered or discussed?
That's a good question. And in my knowledge, it didn't come up that I know of in the interviews that we did. It would be a good question to put to the community in terms of prospects for that, if that's something they're thinking about, or if there are other efforts in the region. But yeah, no, it didn't come up in the interviews we did, not to say that there might not be some of that happening in the area.
So could you just, I know I asked the question.
The question was about fish farming, sorry. Yeah.
Say it one more time.
The question was about fish farming.
So have fish populations actually declined significantly up there, that they talked about that as an issue? Or did they think that it was maintaining enough of a population for them to subsist on?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think the question was about fish populations and sort of fish populations in Eastern Lake Superior. And so I think one of the messages that comes out kind of clearly in the film is around kind of some of the local and traditional knowledge around fisheries that community members hold, that is very much based around place, that is experiential, that is shared sort of across generations and among family members. And so I think part of that story is about that type of sort of knowledge compared to other forms of sort of understanding sort of fish, and more sort of kind of positive science using kind of fisheries and management. And I think you'll hear in the film the message that resonated with me, that I take away from it, is partly that Batchewana First Nation has responsibilities to also kind of protect those waters, and if they continue to fish, then the fish will also continue to provide for the communities. They could maybe probably offer maybe more specifics to your point around changes or fluctuation in fish stocks and how they manage that, and their plans for doing that. They do have sort of a fishing authority they've established in the community that does some of that work.
Go ahead.
Good question. The elder was mentioning they would go out when he was a boy and set nets and then go back in and go back out the next day or the day after and bring the nets in. But fishing by nets is fairly recent. Is there anything in the film on if they're supplying 400 barrels a day, exporting to some other states or other provinces? Is there anything in the film about whether they weirded or whether they actually weird these weirs?
So the question was about different fishing technologies, and so I believe nets are sort of the main way they're fishing presently. I know there wasn't. This is described later in the film, and so I don't know if I'm going to have the name right. But Miriam Agua, who is shown a bit later, refers to traditionally how they fished, and she describes sort of, it's not akin to a net, but it's not a net, and there's another name that they would have used sort of in the past as well for fishing. I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the name so that I can describe it better for you. Some of those details come up later in the film as the fish harvesters kind of speak in more detail about some of the practices.
Anyone else? I perhaps the last question. I was kind of curious about perhaps speaking to your experience and how, like, comparing what you thought it would be like going into the project versus coming out of it, and something that you learn or you view shifting, or your own personal reflection on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a really good question. I mean, I think.
Sorry, repeat.
Oh, the question was about my forgetting that part, my kind of personal reflections and how my views maybe shifted from before and sort of after the project. So I mean, I've thought quite a bit about that just in terms of, my role in this project, or kind of my positionality to how, kind of approach this. And, I think I grew up sort of just north of Toronto, but, still in the Great Lakes watershed in this region. And I think the biggest thing that sort of, I guess, just struck me through this work was the opportunity, which I was fortunate to have, to really get a sort of a different perspective, I think, on this territory and this place than, what I had prior to that as, sort of a, settler, sort of Canadian. So learning, more about Indigenous place names, about practices, about longstanding histories that I think in so many cases continue to be and have been erased. I remember going to Lake Superior Provincial Park at one point, in the sort of plaques in the park that say, the Ojibwe people were such and such, and I'm thinking, well, they're here and they're present, right? And so I think there's a lot of erasure of Indigenous identities, and that it's taking place and continues. And so I think that was something that just sort of personally, I think I felt fortunate sort of experiencing and be able to have the opportunity to, have conversations with people in the community who kind of were able to share their perspectives and stories and their ongoing sort of presence here, and to be able to try and, in the form of a film, share, I think that message and these kind of stories of resurgence.
Do you need to register for the film screening?
No, so you don't. So hopefully, I don't know how many people to expect, but I have not been asking for RSVPs. So if you can come, there's no fee to attend. It's at the screening room on February 23rd. Starts at 6 o'clock. So it'd be fabulous to see you there, and then you can watch the entire film.
Anyone else? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kristen, for sharing that fantastic project. I'm very much looking forward to watching the documentary. Of course, if you don't forget, February 23rd, by all means, go check it out. I'll make sure that we share it on our end. For those of you joining virtually and in person, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Just a quick heads up, our next one is on the March 8th. So normally this is every other week that we do this, but the next one is not until a month from now. And we will have 3 actually happening in March. So March 8th is HMS Speedy, The Tragedy and the Mystery with Dan Buchanan. And if you don't already have the book, perhaps go and grab that one, have a quick read in the next month, bring it by for a signing if you'd like. I know it's sitting on my coffee table, so I have something to work on over the next month. So if you haven't already signed up for the remainder, feel free to do so. There's 3 more presentations covering different topics, and you can still register on our website, marmuseum. That's right, marmuseum.ca/nautical nights. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Feel free to stick around, grab a drink, grab some food downstairs, or have a conversation with Kristen. And thank you again, Kristen, very much.
Right. A lot of technical.
It is indeed.